Hello, welcome to another lesson in AP Comparative Government. Today we're going to be talking about communism and post-communism. The vision of a world without economic distinctions drove the formation of communist regimes around the world, eventually bringing hundreds of millions of people under their banners. In this presentation, we will look at how communism attempted to reconcile freedom and equality and why communist systems have largely failed at that endeavor. Our objectives for today are to understand the foundations of communist ideology, to describe how communist systems sought to eliminate inequality, to analyze the effects of state control over markets and property, to compare how post-communist states have transformed their economic institutions and political institutions, and finally learn what the outcomes have been. So we're also going to be looking at post-communism as well. Communism is a set of ideas that view political, social, and economic institutions in a manner that is fundamentally different from most political thought, challenging much of what we have studied so far. At its most basic level, it is an ideology that seeks to create human equality by eliminating private property and market forces. Communism as a political theory and ideology can be traced primarily to the German philosopher Karl Marx, who was born in 1818 and died in 1883. Marx began with a rather straightforward observation. Human beings impart value to the objects they create by investing their own time and labor into them. In other words, once human beings learned how to produce things of value, others found that they could gain these things at little cost to themselves simply by using coercion to acquire them. This is when we have the rise of a capitalist system. Marx believed that structures rather than people or ideas made history. Specifically, Marx spoke of a human history and human relations as functions of what he termed the base and the superstructure. So again, key terms here are going to be base and superstructure. The base is a system of economic production, including the level of technology, what he called the means of production, and the kind of class relations that exist as a result. These are called the relations of production. Resting on the base is a superstructure, which represents all human institutions, politics and the state, national identity and culture, religion and gender, and so on. Marx viewed this superstructure as a system of institutions created essentially to justify or perpetuate the existing order. People consequently suffer from false consciousness, another key term here, meaning that they believe they understand the true nature of the world around them, but in reality, they are deluded by the superstructure imposed by capitalism. So we have the base, which is basically just our sense of individualism, our sense of humanity. However, the base is governed by the superstructure, which is all the institutions that we have created as human beings. And most of those institutions are either ruled by the patriarchal system or a capitalist system. Marx used this framework to understand historical development and to anticipate the future of capitalism. When we talk about this false consciousness, then we are talking about this idea that we're gonna be, there's an illusion around us of what is right and what is wrong, of what is liberty and what is equality. And the capitalist system doesn't let us understand that idea. That's why we actually develop a false consciousness. So Marx concluded that human history developed in phases, each driven by a particular kind of exploitation. The phases went from agrarian societies to feudalism, jumped to aristocracy and to the development of capitalism, which defined the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie are members who sought to gain political power and to remake the economic and social order in a way that better fit capitalist ambitions. The last phases, however, involved a revolution led by the working class or the proletariat to establish a new infrastructure, a communist one. Marx called this entire process dialectical materialism. We're going to be having a master-slave dialectic between the master and the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. That's why this is called the master-slave dialectic, because Karl Marx's work is based on the work of Hegel, who talks about a thesis, an antithesis, and a thesis, which he basically terms the master-slave dialectic when it's applied into the relationships between humans. So whenever there's a relationship between humans, we're going to have dialectical materialism, especially when that relationship is controlled by the means of production, it's controlled by a capitalist system. So dialectic is a term that he used to describe history as a struggle between the existing order, the thesis, and to challenge to that order the antithesis, resulting in historical change, the synthesis. So again, the thesis is going to be the bourgeoisie, who have established a specific order. The antithesis are going to be the proletariat, who are going to be establishing a communist order. And the synthesis is going to be the historical change at hand. Materialism simply refers to the fact that this tension is over material factors, specifically economic ones. Marx believed that revolutions inevitably result from this dialectic process. So again, let's just go over this basis of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. This is called a Hegelian dialectic. We also know it as a master-slave dialectic. And this is a way that people relate to each other if it's applied to sociology and political science. We're going to have a thesis in terms of the order that's already established, the status quo, the person who has more power in an interpersonal relationship. And then the antithesis is going to be the person that has less power in a relationship between equals, and the person that, and in general, is going to be the opposing forces of the established order. The synthesis, at the end of the day, is going to be the way that we have that change, the outcome of the relationship between the thesis and the antithesis. Two of the most notable followers of Marx's ideas were Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, more commonly known as Lenin, and Mao Zedong. Lenin and Mao came to lead communist revolutions in Russia in 1917 and in China in 1949 respectively. Lenin in particular believed that revolution could be less carried out in less advanced countries. Let's go over that again. Lenin in particular believed that revolution could be carried out in less advanced countries if leaders constructed a vanguard of the proletariat. Again, a vanguard of the proletariat. This term is meant for a small revolutionary movement that could seize power on behalf of the people who may lack consciousness, the consciousness necessary to actually start the revolution, to actually rise up. Communist parties maintain control over society not only through repression but also by carefully allocating power through the country's various political, social, and economic institutions, a thorough form of co-optation. This strategy can be seen clearly in what we call the nomenclatura. This is the word in Russian that you're seeing. Nomenclatura, basically is going to be where politically sensitive or influential jobs in state, society, or the economy were staffed by people chosen or approved only by the Communist Party. The nomenclatura encompassed a wide range of important positions: the head of a university, the editor of a newspaper, a military office, a film director. I mean, we have people in the Communist Party in every single aspect of life. This is what the poster is showing us. Not surprisingly, party approval often required party membership, making joining the party the easiest way to prove one's loyalty and rise up the career ladder to actually get a good job. Party membership could also bring other benefits: better housing, the ability to travel abroad, or to access the scarce consumer goods that they had at that time. For example, one of the scarcest consumer goods in the USSR was actually soap. According to my Russian professor in college, she usually told us that the best thing out there was actually getting soap from abroad, because the soap that they got in the Soviet Union wasn't actually really helpful in cleaning yourself. A general secretary served as chief executive, and a politburo, short for a political bureau, and central committee acted as a kind of cabinet and legislature. respectively. So we're going to have different branches of government. We're going to have a chief executive, we're going to have a political bureau, and a central committee. The chief executive is going to be the executive branch. The Politburo, political bureau, is going to be the cabinet per se, and the central committee is going to be the legislature. They're going to be shaping national policy and confirming the decisions of the party leadership. Below the central committee, various other bodies extended all the way down to individual places of work or residence, where party members were assigned to basic party organizations called cells. So the party is divided up in cells, and these cells were ostentatiously intended to represent the interests of the people, but they were primarily mechanisms used by the party to closely monitor the population. While the party and its nomenclatura controlled key organizations, communist ideology shaped policy and sought to legitimize authoritarian control. Based fundamentally on the theories of Marx as adapted by Lenin and Mao, communist ideology focused on eliminating inequality and promoting economic development. Under Stalin's rule, many people were purged from the Soviet Communist Party and executed for imaginary crimes. The same thing happened in China. Mao unleashed the Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s, encouraging the public, students in particular, to attack any institution or individual that was either a remnant of pre-communist China or lacked revolutionary zeal. Mao's targets included the party state, which he believed had grown conservative over time and was restricting his power. Indeed, his notable slogan was "Bombard the party headquarters." Because the state held the means of production, many of the typical aspects of capitalism that we take for granted, such as individual profit, unemployment, competition between firms, and bankruptcy, were eliminated. Individuals lost their right to control property, including their own labor. The party state made the decisions about how these resources should be used. Communist leaders redirected national wealth towards a goal of collective equality through such mechanisms such as industrialization and social expenditures. As Mao himself put it, when there is not enough to eat, people starve to death. It is better to let half of the people die so that the other half can eat their fill. Communist countries largely choose to replace the market with a state bureaucracy, which explicitly allocates resources by planning what should be produced and in what amounts, setting the final prices of these goods and deciding where they should be sold, and ultimately leading to a lot of people not having enough resources to actually survive. However, this system is commonly known as central planning or a central economy. So in terms of the communist political economy, we're going to be looking at markets and property that are wholly absorbed by the state. Again, we're going to have this key concept of central planning. The state is going to be providing extensive public goods and social services, including universal systems of public education, healthcare, and retirement. That's the basis of the welfare state in a way. The economy functions as a single large firm whose sole employees are the public. Inequality and poverty are reduced but not eliminated. Individual property rights, profit, unemployment, competition between firms, and bankruptcy are virtually eliminated because we don't need that competition. We don't have those markets. And the means of productions are nationalized. Everything from oil to cane fields become nationalized. So here are the societal institutions under communism. The first one we need to talk about is religion. The ideal of religion under communism is that religion is the opiate of the masses and it should disappear. So, because it's the opiate of the masses are going to be realizing that they need something else, a more secular government, a belief in communism, and therefore, in reality, religion was suppressed. But it didn't necessarily get eliminated because religious leaders also had a lot of money to put into those communist parties. In terms of gender role, the ideal is that men and women will be economically, socially, and politically equal. However, because we have that patriarchal suprastructure above us, then therefore the opportunities, in reality, the opportunities for women increased, but women were still expected to fulfill traditional duties in the home. They were still expected to actually be housewives. In terms of sexuality, the ideal was that repressive institutions such as marriage will be replaced by an openly legalized system of free love. However, many communist countries remain very sexually conservative, especially in terms of the power of women and the representation of the LGBT community. And now, in terms of nationalism as an institution, the ideal was that it should expose, it was exposed as a part of the elites, divide and conquer strategy, and should be eliminated. However, although it was discouraged from doing so, people clung to old national and ethnic identities, and that's why we still have a lot of tensions in terms of those party ideologies and the minorities and the ethnic minorities in those countries as well. So moving forward, we're going to be talking about the collapse of communism. Two factors played an important role in bringing about communism's sudden decline. The first was the re-emergence of Cold War struggles between the Soviet Union and the United States. After tense decades of the 1950s and the 1960s, which were marked by international competition, the arms races, and harrowing events such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States and the Soviet Union settled into a period of detente. This is a policy in which they would just stop any nuclear attempts, but they would just try to keep each other at bay, in which peaceful coexistence became the main goal. But detente only lasted less than a decade. The second cause of the demise of the communist system was the domestic turmoil of the USSR. President Gorbachev initiated the twin policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, which is restructuring, with the intention of liberalizing and reforming communism. So glasnost encouraged public debate with the hope that a frank discussion of the system's shortcomings would help foster change and increase the legitimacy of the regime. Perestroika, or actual institutional reforms in the economy and political system, would flow from this critique. These reforms were expected to include some limited forms of democratic participation and market-based incentives in the economy. Moderate reform, not wholesale transformation, was Gorbachev's goal. Glasnost, on one hand, encouraged public debate, but rather than simply criticize corruption among the nomenclatura or the quality or absence of consumer goods, as Gorbachev expected, people began to challenge the very nature of the political system. Ethnic groups within the Soviet Union and citizens of Eastern European states also used glasnost to agitate for greater freedom for Russian domination. So the policy of glasnost actually opened the door for democracy to permeate in post-communist countries. So in 1989, we have two key events that unfold that are going to be marking, again, the consolidation of communism in China and the fall of the USSR. In terms of China, we're going to have the protests in Tiananmen Square, where basically students try to protest against the Communist Party, and those students were never again seen. The fall of the Berlin Wall, on the other hand, marks the fall of the Eastern Communist Wall, and also is gonna be marking the fall of the USSR. By 1991, increasing turmoil in the Soviet Union leads communist conservatives to oust Gorbachev and seize power. The coup fails because of a weak military support and public demonstrations, and therefore the Soviet Union breaks into 15 separate states. We see this trajectory of what the Soviet Union was and how it started to break up into different states. So let's talk about post-communist countries. Post-communist countries faced and continue to face the challenge of building new political, economic, and social institutions to strike a new balance between freedom and equality. Simultaneous transformation of all the three areas is unprecedented, and this task has met varying degrees of success. Yes, they are post-communist countries. Yes, they have established a democracy, but those democracies are not the strongest because they do not have that institutionalization that they need. So, post communist countries have also faced the prospect of building democratic regimes where authoritarianism has long been the norm. This project requires numerous tasks, like creating a separation of powers between branches of government, choosing between different kinds of executive and legislative institutions, and establishing electoral laws and regulating political parties. And doing all of this is basically need to generate support among all the actors in society. So it's a really hard way to actually transform a country because you have to transform every sector of that country. Civil rights and liberties have also been a final area of concern. Civil rights and liberties include such things as free speech and unequal treatment under the law. Under communism, constitutions typically established an elaborate set of civil liberties, though in reality they were largely ignored by those in power. With the collapse of communism, the challenge has been to expand these hollow rights and liberties. These once hollow rights and liberties. So, in many of the former Soviet states, including Russia, democracy is illiberal and weakly institutionalized or completely absent. Because these countries tend to be poorer and they have little historical experience of democracy due to the long period of Imperial Russian and Soviet control. In many of these countries, authoritarian leaders, often from communist nomenclatura, have consolidated power in strong presidencies, limiting the possibility for power sharing and democratic accountability. Democratic rights and freedoms are restricted, civil society is weak, and those in power have enriched themselves through corrupt practices. I think this image speaks to that weakness in democracy that we see in post communist countries. This is just an image of Berlin. On the right hand side, we're going to be seeing East Berlin, who has a different set of light bulbs that were produced in communist Russia. Whereas on the left, we see Western Berlin, where we see a brighter side, a more developed city, because we see more light, obviously, and this is due to the markets that are available in that area of town, especially up until 1989. And so, again, the dimmed lights on the Eastern Front, I think, represent that lack of democratic institutionalization that those countries, post communist countries, have. So, to generate economic growth and limit the power of the state must re-entrust economic resources to the public, placing them back into private hands. But the task of privatization is neither easy nor clear. To privatize these assets, the state first must determine their value, something difficult in a system where no market has existed. Privatization was carried out in several different ways depending on the country and its economic assets. Small businesses like restaurants or retail shops were often sold to their employees, and some countries also sold many large businesses like automobile manufacturers to the highest bidders, who were often foreign investors. So they wanted to revivify the economy. They needed to do so quickly so that they could have the funds necessary to institutionalize democracy. And what they do is they basically lost a lot of companies to foreign investors who did not care about the actual market of the country itself. And they had to, all those nationalized enterprises that the government had became privatized as well. However, that's a really, really tough process. Along with recreating private property, states needed to recreate a market in which property, labor goods, and services could all function in a competitive environment that would determine their value. On the surface, marketization appears easier than privatization, a simple matter of eliminating central planning and allowing the market to resurface naturally. But marketization too is complicated. Some argue that shock therapy, and that's why I use this image, over gradualism, advocating for market reform that would free prices and bring an end to central planning and state subsidies for businesses virtually overnight. So, a lot of post communist countries are going to be implementing this shock therapy on their economy in order to allow marketization to happen really, really fast and allow privatization to happen faster than we're expected, and for central planning to basically cease to exist in a very quick manner. So much attention has focused on China, which is still controlled by a communist party, but in many ways can be thought of as post-communist in its economic system. Since the 1970s, China's reforms have included a dramatic expansion of private business and agriculture, all with the support of the Chinese Communist Party. The slogan of this set of economic reforms, "To get rich is glorious," sounds anything but Marxist, and it is rooted in the practical realization that earlier drives for rapid economic growth led to disaster. So again, they're going to be implying a little bit of liberal economic system within their communist system already. So Chinese introduced economic transition while restricting political change so as to better manage the course of reform. Yet the Chinese model has its own problems. Alongside economic growth and the development of a free market and private property, problems such as inflation, corruption, unemployment, and growing inequality have also surfaced, and often exacerbated by the still powerful presence of the state in the Chinese economy. So yes, they're still communist. We can call them post-communist in terms of their economy because they liberalize their economy. They have allowed for privatization. They have allowed for that private property to actually be owned by different individuals. However, the state still controls Chinese economy. So, like religion, ethnic, and national identities have also reemerged as potent forms of identification. Levels of national pride have risen across many of those same states surveyed over the same time period. In many post-communist countries, both leaders and publics have sought to instill national pride and resurrected the values, symbols, and ideas that bind people together. The cases for Russian and Chinese patriotism speak for themselves. So finally, our bibliography, I want to thank Patrick O'Neill for his book, and we recognize all the authors of media content in this presentation. Thank you.